You are listening to Off the Shelf, a podcast by The Conference Board.
Hi, my name is Robin Erickson, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this edition of Off the Shelf, a book discussion series brought to you by The Conference Board. Today I will be chatting with Kim Shepard about her book, Remote Work, Redesign Processes, Practices, and Strategies to Engage a Remote Workforce. I'm really excited to have this chance to chat with Kim as she's a senior fellow and here at the Conference Board, and she and I have worked together. And I also know that Kim knows what she's talking about when she discusses remote work, because as the CEO of Decision Toolbox, Kim took that company virtual in 2002, almost 20 years ago, with more than 100 employees working across the US and 3 other countries. So welcome, Kim. And tell us why you and your co-author, Chris Dyer, decided to write this book now.
Well, we actually decided to write a book in November of 2019, but we weren't quite sure what we were going to write it about. And so we were racking our brains on, what do we know best? And we settled on remote work. And obviously this was before COVID. And we just started thinking about what are the potholes that we fell into. So as you mentioned, I took my company remote on the backs of the pandemic that I called 9/11. I owned a high volume recruitment firm. No one was hiring. Business stopped. I was about to go bankrupt. And I said, if I'm going to go down, the last thing I'm going to get rid of are my people. So I started stripping out everything except human beings. And that ended me in a remote workplace. And it turned out to be very successful. And I know we'll talk about that in a minute. And then in 2008, my writing partner, Chris Dyer, who's the CEO of a lovely company called People G2, which is a background check company, he and I had known each other for quite a while. And in 2008, on the back of the pandemic I call the stock crash and the flip of the housing market, he too found himself wanting to get rid of everything but his people. And he and I worked together and we took him remote. And so we thought, you know what, we probably know this topic better than any topic, and we don't know if there's an audience for it, but let's start writing it anyway.
Well, and I'd actually love to have you start where you did with when you took Decision Toolbox virtual. How was that received by your employees, and what were the consequences, at least initially?
Well, it started out as a chocolate mess because I had nobody to follow. I had no idea what I was doing. But I thought, let's just think our way through this. And I pulled in an outside consultant who was an expert in, I guess if you're about to go chapter 11 or you had to strip expenses, or I forget what his title was, but he made a list of 22 things that I needed to do that were all equally awful. Like giving up your cubicle space, giving up your server room, turning in the keys to your company cars, just everything. And actually, luckily, I had a bridge loan due to the bank. And so I could say, I know that I owe you $10,000. I can pay you $1,500, or you have to get behind the bank. And as awful as that sounds and felt at the time, it was the only way that I could, my single purpose was to hang on to then I had 37 employees and I wanted to keep all of them, and was able to do that by stripping away every single expense. But then that left us with, what do we do with corporate culture? What do meetings look like? What does compensation look like? What does leadership look like when all of a sudden, literally overnight, everyone's working from home, and that was unheard of? And I probably spent the next 8 years looking for clients and starting my conversation with, I know I'm remote, but I'm a legitimate company. I know we all work from home, but we actually really work from home. They are permanent full-time employees. I probably spent the first 5 minutes of any introduction justifying the fact that we were a legitimate company that looked like nothing you've ever seen before.
So what were the results from that shift to remote work in your organization with your employees?
Yeah, so I did lose a couple of people that just couldn't make the transition. I started in a transitionary way where people were still geographically close to me, and I got an office space that we could lease out for every Wednesday. So people would come in, and we started out for about 6 months reconvening every Wednesday and huddling and hugging and, keeping the lines of communication and the culture intact that way. And then pretty soon they said, we don't need these Wednesdays anymore. And I said, great. And so as soon as they started truly working from home and not needing to be tethered to an artificial means of communication, it opened up me. The one of the greatest things that was a surprise to me, because I had never thought about it before, is that it allowed me to hire the best talent I found, no matter where they were. And so if I found a superstar living in Milwaukee, didn't matter. And in pretty short order, I ended up with employees in 6 countries and 34 states within the United States. And then I started to develop little pockets of people. So, I would have maybe 5 or 6 people in or around Dallas, in or around Atlanta, in or around Seattle. And so they could huddle up together and have lunches once a month. And, because you need that human interaction. And then my goal was to really recreate the human interaction on a virtual platform. And, I used the term virtual before we used remote, it was virtual. Mm-hmm. And so that kind of dates me a little bit. But, and then I personally set out with the philosophy that my clients are my people's customers, but my clients are my people. And it just worked out really well because it created very strong lines of communication on a strong cultural platform that I've got your back, you get our clients back, and it worked out great.
So they say that experience is the best teacher, and it sounds like you learned a lot. So in the book, it says that when you take your company virtual, there should be a deliberate, curated process, and that the best sequence when designing what you want in your remote model is people, process, tools, and technology. So I can't agree with you more. And I think that many organizations are thinking about attracting and retaining top talent that thrives in a remote model. And especially now that we have a really tight labor market. So another concept that you talk about in the book is the me Inc. mentality. And I'd love to have you explain that to our listeners and then talk about how you can actually spot people who are me Inc. thinkers.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, I've been talking about me Inc. for probably the past 12 years and the concept, and it's never been more important than right now because of going through COVID. People start thinking more about themselves. They're working from home, in the clothing of their choice, in the room of their choice. I mean, so me Inc. means you are a commodity, you as the employee. And I encourage in the book for employees to find the best work environment for them. They don't just choose you, you choose them too. So go out and vet potential employers. And what that pulls into is I always looked for what I call Jedis. So Jedis are my version of what's called A players. The problem with A, B, and C players, problem with the term A players for me is, to me, it connotes you were very good either in your last job or in your current job, but it tells me nothing about you. And if I don't know about you, then if a monkey wrench gets thrown into the cogs, I don't know how you're going to react. So what I look for are Jedis, and Jedis are those superior people that are really, really good at life. So therefore, they're usually going to be very, very good at whatever they decide to do with themselves. Jedis were Jedis when they were 5. They were Jedis at age 12, at age 22. They were Jedis in college. Jedis are those people, you go into a restaurant and there's 15 waiters and there's that one waiter or waitress that's exceptional. That's your Jedi in the room. You go to the pharmacy and there's 6 people behind the counter, but there's that one person, and that one person has just got it going on and knows everything that's going on. That's your Jedi. So when I went remote, what I was focused on were hiring Jedis. And I recently just went to a birthday party for one of my former employees who happened to be with me for 16 years. And she was reliving the story over lunch there was a handful of us, of my ex-employees and myself. And she was saying, you hired me over the phone in 30 minutes, and I could feel your virtual hug. I could feel, I knew exactly what I was joining, but I'm curious how you knew I was the right person to hire. And I said to her, because I heard the Jedi in your voice. And I hope this is not too abstract of a concept, but it's those exceptional. We see them all. We see Jedis all around us. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I do. But how would you say that you would identify one during an interview?
Well, I would ask questions like, I'm looking for Jedis. Tell me a Jedi story.
Okay.
And a Jedi has one. And there's equally as many people that I didn't hire in a 30-minute conversation where I heard no spark. I heard no, I don't want to say superiority because that is totally the wrong word, but efficiency and excellence. And Jedis, and tying that to the Me Inc. world, are always invested in making themselves better, in knowing something they didn't know yesterday, in reading something, in attending a class, in asking a question. To me, a Jedi is someone, if I throw out an acronym and they don't know it, a Jedi will instantly say, I'm sorry, but I don't know what that acronym means.
Right. Rather than assuming that they,
Good.
Rather than letting you assume they know what what you're talking about. Yeah.
Exactly. A Jedi, as soon as someone says, I'm sorry, but talking to me, the CEO, I don't know what that is. Now they have my attention.
Mm-hmm. So your book, I love it because it's easy to read, easy to understand. I thought the graphics that you had in it were really good. And to be honest with you, I think I don't think that's actually pretty high praise for me. I find a lot of business books hard to read. But I loved the story about the motivational speech that you gave at Camp Pendleton and the great business idea that you gave to the officers around focusing on the holes, not the cheese. So would you mind setting up that story and then talk about what you mean by focusing on the holes?
Absolutely. That was my personal Idaho moment in that speech. So the Supreme Commander at the time of Camp Pendleton, General Mills Speece, was a personal friend of mine through a nonprofit that I was serving on the board for. And he had heard me speak somewhere, and he sent me an email, and he said, I would like you to speak to my officers that are transitioning out of the military and into the private sector. I said, fabulous. I would love to do that. What do you want me to talk about? And back came an email that said, we know there's something we don't know, but we don't know what it is. And my heart dropped. What the hell do I do with this? So I sent an email back. Can you give me a little more details? What exactly do you want me to talk to? And he again said, we know there's something we don't know, but we don't know what it is. And I went, oh boy, how long do you want me to talk for? And the email comes back, about an hour and 20 minutes. And I went, oh my goodness. Now, I had about a month to prepare for this. And every time I tried to look into myself to come up with an agenda, I came up with exactly zero. And the night before I was to give the speech, I scribbled a couple little notes on a napkin in the kitchen. And I was like, this is all I've got. And it wasn't even words. It was just little diagrams. It was an inverted, two pyramids, one properly placed and one inverted. And then four little circles that would represent people, process, tools, technology, with a couple of little squiggles. And that was it. And my best friend said, what are you doing with this? And I said, that's my speech for tonight. And she went, oh boy, oh boy. So I got there and I walked in and there was a bottle of wine on the table and there was an empty glass. And in front of everyone, I filled that glass of wine to the top and I picked it up and I drank the whole entire glass down and looked at them like, oh boy, here we go. And I came up and I said, I have absolutely nothing prepared, but I'm going to talk to you guys for a while because you're stuck with me. And I could feel the energy in the room that they were scared to death. So I started saying, you guys, I'm like started pulling threads. And it was like, you guys are scared to death and you're about to make the biggest error of your life because you are trained leaders, but this scary monster called the private sector is going to scare you into taking jobs as managers and not as leaders. And here's the difference. Managers do and leaders think. And you have been trained to be thinkers and not doers. You don't even know how to do what you're supposed to do. That's why you have doers. And the in the private sector needs your leadership skills sorely. Don't make that boo-boo. So then I went into a thing, I had them all stand up, and they were all in their dress whites with their fruit salads on their chest and their medals and their pins and their color and their stuff and their stars on their collar and da. And I was scared to death because I had no idea what was coming out of my mouth next. And I was just closing my eyes and falling back and trusting that I was doing something that I was supposed to be doing. And it felt very much like channeling to me. And I'm not that metaphysical by nature, but it felt that way. And I had them all stand up, and they had white, because they were eating, they had the white napkins. And I said, I want you to all hold those napkins up in the air. And I want you to imagine that they are one giant piece of Swiss cheese. And therefore, in your napkin, in your piece of Swiss cheese, there are giant holes. And I want you, when designing yourself, and I shared with them one of my favorite phrases, design what you want or deal with what you get. And I said, I want you, when you're designing yourself, I don't want you looking at the cheese. I want you looking at the holes. So to illustrate that, now I'm getting a little cocky. We're about 30 minutes in. There's a 2-star general at the table right in front of me. I ask him what he wants to be when he grows up, and he says, I have no idea. And I said, no problem. What don't you want to be when you grow up? And he said, I don't want to have a boss. I don't want to be in the military. I don't want to be broke. I don't want to be stuck in a cubicle. And he started listing all these don'ts. I don't. And I said, you just made your list of what you do want. It's the reverse of all those things. So let's start there. Now I'm really feeling the glass of wine or feeling cocky or something. And I said, let's design a career for you, given what you just told me you don't want. And I said, when looking for the holes in your cheese, when designing a career, look at current events. And I said, what we have happening right now off the coast of Italy is a cruise ship sitting on a rock, taking in water. And why? Airlines have cruise marshals, or airline marshals, but cruise ships don't have cruise marshals. So why don't you take 25, 50 guys in this room, create a curriculum, create a company, go to 6 cruise ships and say, one of you is going to be able to boast, we are the first cruise ship to have cruise marshals. You let them battle out who's going to grab you first for the most amount of money. And then you deliver this cruise marshal theory. And he was looking at me and I was looking at me going, holy cow, what just happened? And he had this big smile on his face. And then I looked out to the room and I said, who's next? And everybody's hands went up. Redesign me, redesign me, redesign me. So that's my story at, looking for the holes instead of the cheese. When designing a remote company, you hear this phrase, if I can't see it, I can't manage it. Then don't see it. Imagine it. Imagine it. Look at the hole in the cheese. Create the void. Therein is going to lie your culture, your communication model, your meeting model, your key performance indicators for measuring productivity and success. It all lies in the holes and not the cheese. Don't go create more cheese. There's already cheese there. Don't do it.
Okay. All right. I love that advice. So in another chapter in the book, you talk about creating your own renaissance, sort of like what you were trying to do for each of those officers. You say it's possible, but in a remote model, you give examples of how going remote helps minimize the kind of micro decisions required to go into an office every day. So what do you mean by micro decisions, and why should we minimize them? And how does remote work help workers avoid decision fatigue?
I love all of those questions. Those are excellent. So I'm going to refer back to my last company just because I pulled it off. So it's an example that I put in the book. We talk about it, kind of metaphorically, but we also talk about practical. Mm-hmm. And I set out to, on a remote platform, build a company that won every single award for bitchin' boss, best place to work, workplace flexibility. Because I figured if I could build it and I can win it, then I actually accomplished it. So it was my ego ploy for me personally, a big ego. I want lots of trophies. But if I get the trophies, it means that I actually accomplished that thing. And so what I did was I decided, people will say, how can you trust on a remote platform? How can you trust your person? And my response is, how can you not? Trust them first. And if you're wrong, then make a decision. But by dragging your feet in the front end of the process, you're hurting everybody. So by trusting your employee, you're saying, I can minimize how I have to manhandle you, because I'm going to empower you to manhandle yourself. My people, I had 96 stay-at-home moms, and most of them were making six figures. And I didn't, on a remote platform, I didn't care when they were doing what. I don't care how you're doing it. I don't care if you've got a diaper in your hand and a headset on your head and you're closing a recruitment deal. I don't care. I don't see it. But if you have to take little Johnny or little Betsy to, the dentist or the doctors, nowhere in my hierarchy does it exist for a place for you to ask permission. There is no one to ask permission from. You just go and get your work done. I don't care if you're doing it at 6 a.m. or 10 o'clock at night. I don't care if you're nocturnal or you're an early bird. I make it work for you. So by pushing all of the junk that leaders think they need to handle, and they think they're accomplishing something good by handling all that junk, when you push it back to an employee and they handle themselves, it frees the leader up to think about bigger things and to become the leader instead of the doer, kind of what I said in Camp Pendleton. A manager does and a leader leads. I want to get those managerial things pushed downstream so that my senior team can think upstream and everybody wins.
So right now we're actually seeing that leaders want their employees to return to the workplace, and that employees really don't want to return to the workplace. Now, that's not true for every employee. There's, a lot of employees, I think, especially younger employees or new employees who don't know the organizations they're working in that well. But, how do you make leaders be comfortable with this remote work model?
Yeah. Well, I think the first question to ask a leader is, why do you want them to return to the workplace? And really push on the honest answer. Because sometimes their honest answer is going to be, I'm not seen by upstream unless they can see me managing downstream. Well, that's self-serving. Or, there can be legitimate reasons. If you're making wine, you got to be in the vineyard, and if you're making jets, you need to be in the hangar. There's legitimate ones. But I remember when Marissa Mayer brought in all the remote workers from Yahoo, if you're making internet, why do they have to be in the office? So you really want to ask it and really drill down to the honest answers of why do you want them to return? And the reason I want them to really drill down is because if they don't have a legitimate reason, then they're going to be the problem. If they have a legitimate reason and the remote people no longer want to return, then the remote worker has to ask themselves, why do I not want to return? And if I don't want to return, is this the right job for me? Is this the right company for me? There's a lot of, inward thinking that needs to go on this to come down with the model, whether it be hybrid or not, that's going to work best. What's going to happen a lot in my opinion, in the next year, is a lot of leaders, managers, whatever you want to call them, are going to randomly or arbitrarily say, okay, everybody back. And they're going to come back and they're going to go, I don't want to be back. I don't like being back. Some of them. And then the good ones are going to go looking for companies who have really honestly asked them the question, do I really need you back? If I don't really need you back and you want to come back, great. If I don't really need you back and I'm going to make you come back, your life expectancy with me may be short. That again goes back to the Me Inc. world. A year in lockdown taught a lot of employees that, hey, wait a minute. If I'm a Jedi, I can go anywhere in the world I want to go. And if you're not a Jedi employer, I'm not staying with you any longer.
Oh, I definitely agree. We're actually already seeing companies using the fact that employees can work remotely as part of their employee brand value proposition, and both to attract and retain workers. And I think I think a lot of organizations are going to be surprised when they make decisions about returning to the workplace and people go back and don't want to stay and then leave. There's also another company that I know of that told all 6,000 or 7,000 of their administrative staff that they all had to stay remote after COVID. And while that's good news for some of those employees, some of them may not have the ability to work from home successfully over the long term, and it might not be a good fit any longer. So I think what we have, it's going to be very interesting to see what happens. We've been tracking a lot of remote work here at the conference board, and I'll put a link in the overview for this podcast of our latest report. It talks about remote work and how there's going to be so many more people working remotely. And I would love to have you, as my final question, talk about, we've got two different types of hybrid models. You've got some organizations where some employees will work from home all the time and other employees will work from the office all the time. So that's the first hybrid model. The second hybrid model is where some people work from home some of the time and in the office some of the time. And when you talked about the maxim, design what you want or deal with what you get, I wanted to ask you what advice you had for leaders in hybrid organizations when it comes to ensuring equal visibility and opportunities for those employees who are remote, because they won't have the same exposure as the workers in the office.
Well, okay, and therein lies the first big boo-boo. Why not? Because if you're tracking productivity, which a leader should be doing, track the productivity. A lot of companies are going to see the death of productivity when they randomly bring everyone back. If you're truly tracking your KPIs, which I did in my company religiously, I had all recruiters on 6 KPIs that was on a tracked real time on a dashboard that everyone saw so they could see where their productivity was up, down, off, on, whatever. And I had compensation tied to those 6 KPIs, which is kind of really advanced and really, really cool, because then I attracted the best and the brightest, and the survival of the fittest and the weakest pulled themselves out of my company. We didn't have to let them go. They randomly pulled themselves out. And guess what they did? They went to work for my competition. That's gorgeous math. That is really gorgeous math. But on the hybrid model, they have to have clarity on, if I'm leaving you at home or I'm bringing you back in or we're doing a hybrid, I'm going to track your productivity in each one of those decisions that I made to see if I made the right decision or the wrong decision. And you and I need to have a contract on, we both agree that's the right decision. And you need to afford them a voice. If I'm asking you to come back to the office full time and you really don't want it, tell me why not. And tell me how your productivity for me is going to increase if I go with your decision over my decision. That dialogue needs to take place. And it used to be considered too squishy a couple of years ago. But what we all went through collectively in COVID has changed the dialogue, has changed the narrative. And more conversations have to take place. Soft skills are now here to stay. A soft skill is going to tell you if that employee is going to produce more at home, in the office, or on a hybrid model.
Wow. So it sounds like we've got some work to do on learning how to interview employees, especially around soft skills. But thank you so much, Kim, for your time today. I can't imagine a book topic that's any more relevant right now than remote work is. And especially as organizations are thinking about their return to the workplace plans. So if any of you are interested in purchasing the book, Remote Work by Chris Dyer and Kim Shepard, it's available through Amazon and other major booksellers. And if you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to our off-the-shelf book discussion podcast series, or explore the entire catalog of podcast programming from the Conference Board by visiting our webcast at www.conference-board.org/podcasts. Thanks so much for joining us today, and look forward to the next time.
This has been Off the Shelf, a podcast by the Conference Board.